The Soviet Union was the biggest ever attempt to create a utopia. That attempt failed. The Union was patently an evil empire. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and member countries have since moved on, but they still have strong links to the past. All across the former Union states remain eerie Soviet relics. At a patch of Crimean seabed, you can find what seems like some kind of Soviet Atlantis. It's home to countless statues depicting communist leaders. When the Soviet Union fell, thousands of such statues were simply abandoned as Russia transitioned into a modern democracy. One diver collected as many of them as he could and buried them underwater. At first, it was an underwater shrine to heroes of the Soviet Union, but other divers have since been adding more sculptures, many of which nothing to do with communism. It's now known as an underwater museum. It's hard to find anything more dystopian than Bulgaria's BUZLUDZHA, and the interior looks like a teleportation pad from science fiction. This crumbling structure was home to Bulgaria's Communist Party, built to represent the iron grip of communism, but the building has been left uncared for as the Bulgarian government can't afford to maintain it. In the 1980s, it was grand and modern, but now it's just a decaying shell atop a hillside. The Soviets were at the height of their power when it was built. It just goes to show they had no idea the Union would collapse just 10 years later. In Moldova's capital city, there are many remnants of the Soviet Union. By far the best is an abandoned circus. It was first opened in the 1980s and entertained almost 2,000 locals per show, but was later neglected as Moldova is among Europe's poorest countries. So it was left to decay, and today it's just creepy. When you look at the dust-covered ring, it's hard to imagine bears, elephants and lions once performed here for Soviet elites. At Antarctica's pole of inaccessibility, one of the continent's hardest places to reach, a group of Western scientists were shocked to find a bust of Vladimir Lenin. It turns out the area hosted a Soviet research station in the 1950s. The Soviets only stayed there for 2 weeks, but they left this plastic bust of Lenin behind, so no one could deny they reached the pole of inaccessibility first. The bust is actually on top of a wooden hut, which is now completely buried by snow. To celebrate their victory over Nazi Germany, the Soviets built the tallest sculpture on Earth, on a hillside looking over what was then called Stalingrad. It remains an impressive and quite intimidating sight. Standing 6 meters taller than the Statue of Liberty, she represents how the Soviet motherland can rise up at any time. Stalin wanted a huge monument, and sculptors from all over the Union sent in samples of their work. They picked an artist known for his socialist realism depicting valor of ordinary Russians. The statue isn't fixed to the ground, but held in place only by its 8,000-ton weight. The small Crimean town of Balaclava was home to one of the Soviet Union's most secret places. It's a massive nuclear submarine base, which was so secretive the entire town was tightly controlled. People wanting to visit Balaclava would need special permission. By the fall of the Soviet Union, their navy was in ruin, and it wasn't long before the base was abandoned. It now serves as a museum, and remains in the general condition it always has, with huge blast doors, and these guys to creep out tourists. The Seven Sisters are 7 skyscrapers built in Moscow during Stalin's final years in power. They really are wonderful examples of Stalinist-style architecture. There was another huge building planned for Moscow, the Palace of the Soviets. It was to be a huge socialist realist palace, with a statue of Lenin atop towering over Moscow. But construction was halted by the Nazi invasion and never finished. It's said the Seven Sisters have hidden entrances to underground tunnels, which led to secure places for Soviet leaders to discuss secret plans. Every year, thousands are drawn to Stalin's World, the world's most Soviet theme park. Much of the park has been recreated as a prison camp. You'll find barbed wire-laced paths, guard towers, and fragments of concentration camps. You'll find 86 statues, mostly of Lenin and Stalin, which is what most people go there to see. Nostalgia is powerful. Even Soviet terror can be missed. And so hundreds of thousands of people have come here. The Kremlin Wall Necropolis is a Soviet burial monument in Moscow's Red Square. Inside the wall are the cremated remains of important figures of the Soviet Union, but the really important Soviets have their tombs buried alongside the wall. Brezhnev, Stalin, and other monsters were buried here. Every year, Russian communists gather at the necropolis to celebrate Joseph Stalin's birthday. It began in 1917, when 240 dead Bolsheviks were buried here, and now it's just a weird communist shrine. This city was completely abandoned at the end of the Cold War. It was a Nazi military city before the Soviets took control. At its peak, 75,000 people lived there, and as they suddenly abandoned the area, we can catch a glimpse into Soviet life. It was a Nazi military city before the Soviets took control. Still covered in communist propaganda and symbolism, it's effectively the world's biggest time capsule. It's about 25 miles from Berlin. If I were running some kind of cult, this is where I'd go. I'd get plastic surgery to look like Vladimir Lenin. That way people would think the whole city was built for me. I have a new Twitter because I think my old one got shadow banned, and I probably deserve it. But I'm going to be active on this new one. I wanted my username to be Polar Freak, but that was taken, and so was Mr. Dank. So I'm going with Real Escafy. I'll put a link in the description. So that's the end of this video. If you want to support this channel, you can do so simply by leaving a like. And if you want more content from me, I have a second channel where I do different videos about different things.